The engineers laughed. Not quietly, not politely. They laughed the way men laugh when they are absolutely certain they are right, and someone else is absolutely, embarrassingly wrong. The someone else in this case was a 41-year-old man standing in the doorway of Harrington Medical Center's most advanced cardiac surgery suite, wearing a faded gray jacket, 2 sizes too large, holding a paper coffee cup with a cracked lid. His name was Darnell, and he had driven 4 hours from a county hospital in rural Georgia that most of these surgeons had never heard of and would never visit. Nobody had invited him. That was the first thing everyone in the room made clear. 6 weeks earlier, a man named Vincent Harrington had received news that should have been impossible. Vincent was 63, the founder of Harrington Medical Systems, a network of 14 hospitals across the Southeast. He had built the company from a single clinic in Charlotte into something worth $800 million. He had outlasted 3 competitors, 2 recessions, and 1 federal investigation. He was not a man accustomed to being told there was no solution, but that is exactly what his team of cardiologists told him about his son. Theo Harrington was 26. He had been admitted 6 months earlier with a condition that the best cardiac surgeons in the country had described, in various ways, as complex, unpredictable, and, increasingly, inoperable. The defect was a rare structural abnormality in the left ventricular wall, compounded by scar tissue from a procedure attempted 2 years prior that had failed to correct the underlying problem. The scar tissue had thickened. The window for intervention was narrowing. Vincent had spent over $4 million on consultations. He had flown in a specialist from Johns Hopkins. He had paid for a second team from the Cleveland Clinic to review the imaging. He had commissioned a private surgical simulation using a 3D printed model of his son's heart. Every team came back with the same answer, wrapped in different language, softened with different degrees of sympathy. There was nothing more to do. Vincent Harrington was not a man who accepted that answer. So he did what men with money and power do when the system they built fails them. He called everyone he knew, pulled every favor, and demanded names. Names of surgeons who were unconventional. Names of people who thought differently. Names of anyone who had done something others said could not be done. He got 11 names. He flew 10 of them in. He paid for everything. The 11th name he almost ignored. It had come from an unlikely source, a retiring hospital administrator in Augusta named Ruth, who had worked in rural medicine for 35 years. She had mentioned it almost as an afterthought, the way people mention something they're not sure will be taken seriously. There's a doctor down in Millhaven, she had said. Works at the county facility. Trained at Emory, but he left the city practice about 8 years ago. Goes by Darnell. He did something with a pediatric valve case last year that nobody could explain. The cardiology department at Grady Memorial still talks about it. Vincent's assistant had flagged the name, then buried it beneath the 10 others. But it was still in the file when the 10th specialist flew home without an answer. Nobody told Darnell much when they called. The assistant who reached him kept the details vague. Would he be willing to consult on a complex cardiac case at Harrington Medical Center in Charlotte, they asked. The family would cover travel. There would be a consultation fee. Darnell asked 2 questions. What is the patient's age, and can I see the imaging in advance? The imaging arrived in his email that evening. He studied it for 3 hours. He did not sleep well that night, but not because the case discouraged him. It was the opposite. He drove to Charlotte the next morning instead of flying. He said later that he needed the time to think. When he arrived at the hospital, he was shown to a waiting area on the 4th floor. He sat there for 40 minutes before anyone acknowledged him. The receptionist assumed he was a patient's family member. One of the nurses asked him twice if he needed help finding his way somewhere. He said, "No, thank you. I'm waiting to meet with the surgical team." She looked at his jacket. She looked at the paper cup. She said she would let someone know. The someone who eventually came to the waiting area was a senior resident named Paxton Fell, who had been assigned to manage the consultation logistics. Paxton was 32, had trained at Duke, and had been at Harrington for 2 years. He looked at Darnell the way people look at a word they don't recognize, briefly, then away. "You're the consultant from Millhaven?" he asked. Darnell said he was. Paxton said the full team would be assembled in Conference Room B in 20 minutes, and that they had prepared a summary of the case for the consultants to review. He said it the way you say something to a person you are not sure understands the process. Darnell said he had already reviewed the imaging. Paxton looked at him again. Then he said, "All right," and led him down the hall. There were 9 people in Conference Room B. 8 of them had credentials on the wall, publications in peer-reviewed journals, and affiliations with institutions whose names carry weight in the world of cardiac surgery. They had been working on Theo Harrington's case collectively for weeks. They had debated. They had modeled. They had consulted one another in hallways and over dinner and in late-night emails. They were the best that Vincent Harrington's money could assemble. They looked at Darnell Okafor the way the engineers laughed, with the certainty of people who already know how this story ends. One of them, a man named Dr. Clifford Boyle, who had performed over 2,000 open-heart surgeries and had once been profiled in a national medical magazine, did not even look up from his folder when Darnell took a seat. Another, a woman named Dr. Patricia Sen, made a small sound that was not quite a laugh, but was close enough. She whispered something to the man beside her. He pressed his lips together to suppress a smile. Vincent Harrington was also in the room. He sat at the far end of the table, watching. He said nothing. Paxton introduced Darnell with a description that was technically accurate and professionally devastating. He said that Dr. Okafor was a consultant from Millhaven County Hospital, a facility with a 42-bed capacity serving a largely rural population in southwest Georgia. He said Okafor had trained at Emory. He did not mention the pediatric valve case at Grady Memorial. He had not thought to look it up. Dr. Boyle finally looked up from his folder. He studied Darnell for a moment. "What's your volume?" he asked. It was not a polite question. Volume, in surgical terms, means how many procedures a surgeon performs per year. It is a proxy for skill in a profession that treats repetition as the highest qualification, Darnell answered honestly. At a 42-bed county hospital in a rural county, his volume was not impressive by the standards in that room. Someone shifted in their seat. Dr. Sen set down her pen. Dr. Boyle leaned back and said, with the precision of a man who has ended many conversations, "With respect, I'm not sure this is the right room for you." The room was quiet for a moment. Then a few of the others looked at Vincent to see how he would respond. Vincent's jaw was tight. He was a man who had paid for this gathering, and he did not like what was happening in it, but he also did not yet know what to do about it. Darnell did not respond to Dr. Boyle immediately. He opened the folder he had brought with him, a worn manila folder, not a prepared presentation binder like the others, just paper, and he placed 3 printed images on the table in front of him. "I've looked at the full imaging series," he said. "I want to show you something most of the reports have been missing." Nobody moved to look. He kept going anyway. He pointed to the left ventricular wall in the first image and described what he saw with a specificity that was different from what had been in any of the reports. He talked about the tissue composition at the inferior margin of the scar. He talked about the way the echo waveforms from a study done 14 months ago compared to the study done 3 weeks ago, and what the difference suggested about the nature of the tissue change. He talked about a surgical approach that had been used in 2 cases, one at a hospital in Sao Paulo, and one that had been published in a journal that none of the people in the room had read because it was a small European publication that covered low-resource surgical innovation. He talked for 11 minutes. Nobody interrupted him. At the end, the room was a different kind of quiet, not the quiet of polite dismissal. Something else. Dr. Sen had picked her pen back up. She was writing. Dr. Boyle had not leaned back. He was sitting forward, looking at the images on the table, not at Darnell, with an expression that was difficult to read. One of the other surgeons, a younger man named Dr. Harris Crane, said slowly, "The inferior margin distinction. You're saying the scar isn't homogeneous." Darnell said that is exactly what he was saying, and that if it wasn't homogeneous, The approach the previous surgical team had used, and the approach most of the people in this room had been building their plans around, was working from a false assumption about the tissue's behavior under manipulation. Dr. Crane looked at the image. Then he said, almost to himself, that would explain why the simulation kept producing the same failure point. The room shifted. Vincent Harrington asked to speak with Darnell privately after the meeting. They sat in a small office down the hall, the kind of room that exists in hospitals for difficult conversations, with 2 chairs and a window that faced a parking structure. Vincent asked him directly, "Can my son survive this?" Darnell was quiet for a moment. Then he said that survival is never a guarantee in surgery, and that anyone who tells you otherwise is selling you something. But he said that what he saw in the imaging was not the picture of a case that had no options. He said there was a path. It was narrow. It required the surgical team to set aside the approach they had already committed to, which would not be easy, because committed people are not easily redirected. But the path existed. Vincent asked him how he found it when no one else had. Darnell said simply that he had spent 8 years operating in a county hospital where he had no choice but to solve problems with what he had. No simulation software, no large support teams, no budget for the equipment the major centers took for granted. What he had developed, out of necessity, was the ability to look at what was in front of him without the filter of what was supposed to be there. He had learned to see what was actually in the image, not what the textbook said should be. He said he had grown up the son of a man who fixed farm equipment in rural Alabama for 30 years without a single formal certification, and that his father could diagnose a broken machine by the sound it made and the way it felt under his hands, in the dark, without a single diagnostic tool. He said he had watched his father do that and understood something from a very early age about what knowledge actually is, that it does not always live where the credentials hang. Vincent was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I want you on the surgical team." That conversation was not the end of the resistance. It was the beginning of a more organized version of it. Dr. Boyle called the idea reckless. He said it in professional language, in an email copied to 3 members of the hospital's administrative board, but the meaning was clear. He said that integrating an approach developed by someone without relevant volume or institutional experience into a procedure of this complexity was a liability the hospital should not accept. He said it was not personal. It was never personal when they said things like that. It was always about the patient. It was always about protocol. 2 of the other consultants echoed the concern in separate communications. One of them suggested, gently, that perhaps Dr. Okafor's insights could be incorporated into a revised plan developed and executed by the existing team, that his contribution could be acknowledged without giving him a role in the room. Darnell heard about this through Paxton, who delivered the information with the uncomfortable expression of a man who disagreed with the message he was carrying, but did not know what to do about it. Darnell said nothing in response. He went back to the imaging. Vincent Harrington, however, said something. He sent one email. It was 3 sentences. It said that his son's life was not a committee decision, that he had funded this hospital's cardiac wing to the tune of $12 million over the past decade, and that Dr. Okafor would have a role in the surgical room, or Vincent would be speaking with the board about the leadership of the department by the end of the week. The response came in 4 hours. Dr. Okafor would be included. The surgery was scheduled for a Thursday morning. The team gathered at 6 a.m. Darnell was the last to arrive, and he arrived exactly on time, which some people in the room took as another mark against him, because the culture of surgical excellence in places like this valued the gesture of early arrival, the theater of preparation. Darnell had learned in Millhaven that theater cost energy he preferred to spend on the procedure itself. Dr. Crane acknowledged him when he walked in. Nobody else did, at first. The operation took 6 hours and 40 minutes. There were 2 moments during those hours when the established approach would have led the team in a direction that Darnell, watching the tissue respond in real time, recognized as wrong. Both times, he spoke. Both times there was a pause. Both times the team adjusted. The second of those moments was the one that mattered most. It was at hour 4, when the scar tissue at the inferior margin behaved in exactly the way Darnell had predicted in that conference room, not as uniform mass, but as a layered structure with two distinct zones of density. The approach built on the original assumption would have manipulated the tissue in a way that risked a tear. The approach Darnell had described from that European paper engaged the margin differently. Was the primary surgeon. He stopped. He looked at the field. He looked at Darnell. Darnell said quietly, the same thing he had said in the conference room 11 minutes and 3 weeks earlier. Let me show you what I see. Boyle stepped back. It was, by any measure, a small thing, a surgeon stepping back for 30 seconds. But in that room with that history, it was not small at all. Theo Harrington was moved to the recovery ward at 3:42 in the afternoon. His vitals were stable. The surgical team's notes, reviewed later, would show the procedure had gone as planned, and also that the plan had been revised 3 times during execution, each revision driven by observations from a surgeon who had not been wanted in the room. Vincent was in the waiting area when Paxton came out to update him. He stood when he saw the resident's face. Paxton said the procedure had gone well. He said the team was cautiously optimistic. He said Dr. Okafor had been instrumental. Vincent sat back down. He did not speak for almost a minute. When he finally did, he asked where Darnell was. Darnell was in the corridor outside the suite, still in his scrubs, drinking water from a paper cup, not the cracked one from the morning, a clean one, but it was still paper, and writing notes in a small notebook he kept in his front scrub pocket. He wrote notes after every procedure, always had, a habit from the early years in Millhaven when there was no one else to debrief with, and the notes became his way of learning from himself. Vincent found him there. He did not say anything immediately. He stood beside Darnell for a moment, looking at the corridor. Then he said, "Thank you." Darnell nodded once. Vincent said he owed him more than that. He said the consultation fee that had been agreed upon was not what he would be paying. He said he had spoken with the hospital board that morning, before the surgery, and that there was going to be a conversation about what Harrington Medical Systems could build, in partnership with the kind of medicine Darnell practiced. About funding for rural cardiac care, about training programs for surgeons in low-resource settings, about what it would mean to take seriously the knowledge that existed outside the institutions where the money lived. Darnell listened to all of this. Then he said quietly that he appreciated it, but that what he wanted, more than anything the money could build, was for the team in that room to write up what happened today, not in internal notes, in a journal, with his name on it and theirs. He said he wanted the case to exist in the literature, so that the next time a surgeon in a 42-bed county hospital recognized something that the big centers had missed, there was a record that it had happened before. That it was possible, that the knowledge was real, wherever it came from. Vincent said he would make sure of it. 3 months later, the paper was submitted to the Journal of Cardiovascular Surgery. It was co-authored by 6 surgeons, including Dr. Clifford Boyle, whose name appeared second on the byline. The first name listed was Darnell Okafor, affiliated with Millhaven County Hospital, Millhaven, Georgia. Dr. Boyle had not been asked to include his name. He had asked to be included. Theo Harrington attended his first full cardiac rehabilitation session on a Tuesday morning in February, 9 weeks after the procedure. His father sat in the waiting room, while Theo walked on the treadmill for 18 minutes at a pace his previous cardiologist had said might never be possible. When the session was over, Theo came out and sat down beside his father. Vincent showed him the paper on his phone, already available online. Theo read the abstract. He looked at the first name on the byline. He asked his father who Darnell Okafor was. Vincent thought about how to answer that. He thought about the waiting room on the 4th floor, and the paper coffee cup with the cracked lid, and the conference room where 9 people had decided before the meeting started who in the room was worth listening to. He thought about the 11 minutes of quiet that changed everything, he said. He's the man who knew what the rest of us had stopped trying to see. Theo read the name again. Outside, the February light came through the window at a low angle, the way winter light does in Charlotte, thin and clear and honest. It lit up the page on the phone screen and the names on it, and said nothing about which one had been hardest to earn. Have you ever been in a room where someone decided before you opened your mouth that you didn't belong there? Have you ever watched someone dismiss a person, not because of what they knew, but because of where they came from, what they wore, what kind of hospital had their name on file? And have you ever wondered how many answers we've all lost, quietly, because the wrong people were doing the deciding about who was worth hearing? Darnell Okafor drove home to Millhaven on a Friday. He stopped once for gas and coffee. He paid with a card that had $11 left on it before the consultation fee had cleared, and considerably more after. He didn't think about the money much. He thought about the notes in his pocket, and the case that was now in the literature, and the next patient in the county hospital who was waiting for someone to look at what was actually there. He drove the rest of the way in the quiet, the way his father used to sit beside a machine in the dark, listening for the thing that was true.